I'm Andre Sr. at KTVU in San Francisco. I am joined now by Doug Perez, a Bay Area native who has been living in Wuhan, China, and has been through the outbreak since it began there. He joins us to share his story from there now. Welcome, Doug. Describe the first few days when this was happening.
Well, Andre, the first few days were really the scariest. You don't know what's going to happen. You have no idea really about how dangerous, COVID-19, really was. It didn't even have that name when it started out. There are no experts, even the experts, scientists and doctors, even they're unfamiliar with it to a certain extent. So it really was, in some ways horrifying. I was also concerned about, the state. Just, I was concerned about civil disorder, having enough food, about dangers associated with venturing outside to get food, medicine, water, or what have you. Fortunately, those fears never played out. And, I'm hoping it's the same for the USA. Of course, there'll be issues, but I can only hope for the best. Now, months after, the situation's completely different. I can tell you that. I don't even think about, civil disorder or about a shortage. The situation has done a complete 180. Now I could even have, for example, fast food. I could order McDonald's and it can be at my doorstep in 15 minutes. And, but in the early days of the outbreak, we'd order groceries and it would take 2, 3, maybe even 4 days for groceries to come in. And it's not safe to go outside. So, of course we were frightened. We stocked up on rice, we stocked up on masks, which I don't necessarily advise the people in California doing because, those are needed for, workers. But I definitely advise if you can get your hands on some masks or, make some of your own masks, hold on to them, reuse them safely in accordance with CDC guidelines. Masks make a difference too, as a side note.
Doug, what was the first time, what was the date of the first time that this started to really, that you started to notice and things started to change?
I don't think I can't really say, can't recall the exact date, but I would say it was the day that Wuhan went on lockdown, the day that we were not allowed to leave Wuhan, the official first day of the quarantine, and my phone explodes with videos of soldiers at the airport, at the train station, not allowing anyone to leave. That's when I realized how serious this really was. And at the time, when this happened, there was talks of the evacuation and getting out of here. And I really thought that this was as bad as it was going to get. It was going to hit Wuhan hard. It would hit China and other countries, kind of the same way SARS, hit only several dozen countries. And then eventually went away. This really got out of control, and it's way worse than I could have imagined. That being said, in terms of my immediate security and security of my family, the security even of my friends here in Wuhan, it's no longer my chief concern. I'm more concerned about my family and friends back home, as the peak. We haven't even hit the peak in the USA, whereas we're well past the peak. Unless there's a second wave, which is something we're prepared for, but unless there's a second wave, we're in the clear right now. We're past the peak.
When this was happening, when it first started, you lived there with your girlfriend and your dog. What did you all do at that particular
and my girlfriend's brother.
And your girlfriend's brother too. What did you do at that particular point? What were you told to do right when this thing started?
Basically the same thing. Shelter in place. Don't go outside. Exactly what they're telling you guys right now. But it was compounded. It was made so much scarier that we were hearing rumors left and right, seeing videos of doctors breaking down in tears in hospitals. Messages from doctors and nurses saying, "Don't go out," begging people not to go out. So it was really, a very scary time. A very scary time. That being said, eventually we took the lockdown very seriously. Eventually things changed dramatically. Like early on in the lockdown, this is something, again, to get back to your question, sorry for getting on a tangent, but early on, in the lockdown, we had arguments. I had arguments with my girlfriend about the severity of the situation and about what actions we should take. This was such a black swan, horrendous event. You can't even imagine. You have no idea how bad it's going to get. I wasn't sure if there would even be, food in the supermarkets. With a quarantine with millions of people, there's always the possibility of food shortages, and there were some shortages. Fortunately, not of anything, that could lead to starvation. So, fortunately, that fear never came to fruition. But at the time, I was very concerned about it. My girlfriend insisted upon relying on deliveries. I, on the other hand, my stance was we need to go out there. We need to get as much rice and, basic necessities to survive if the worst does happen, if this really gets bad. We had a big argument, we broke a plate. It was scary. But yeah, in the end, she actually won and we didn't go out. But in my defense, the delivery, it took a few days. And we were nervous because deliveries were taking a while. Eventually, they started coming in. Again, deliveries were still very infrequent. So we found it necessary to go outside and go shopping. And, that was scary in of itself. Like they checked our temperatures at the door. People were all trying to avoid each other in the supermarket. I was in the supermarket one day, line. I was in line for maybe 45 minutes, get to the front of the line. And guess what happens? The person the grocery checkout lady, she starts coughing. And she's coughing a fair amount. And I've waited 45 minutes, and I think she's going to touch each and every one of my items. You know what I do? I get back in another line and wait another, 45 minutes. Because I wasn't going to let her touch my groceries. No way. No way. And this was before we had even hit the peak. This was in early February. No way. So that,
That's
and what
incredible.
gets me, what frustrates me, why? I don't understand. Aren't, supermarket employees and delivery men, they should all have masks. I understand there's not enough masks for everyone. That's okay. But people in high contact professions where they're providing food, touching food, delivery men, they should all have masks. And I'm sure that we can, get the resources so that at least they can have some sort of protection. That way they're not spreading it to everyone, they're working with. So, that really shocks me to see that, to hear about that not every, grocery people, workers don't have masks.
Let me ask you a question. We have what they call a stay-at-home order here. What did you have in Wuhan, China in the days after this all started to happen? Was it a lockdown or stay-at-home order?
I would say that's at first, I would describe it more as a stay-at-home order. It was more voluntary at first, for sure. We were largely motivated by fear to stay in. That being said, they let us leave all the time. After a couple weeks, changed dramatically. I'd say 2 weeks. It's almost, I think it kind of reflects the Chinese state itself. It's Leviathan. It's very big, powerful, authoritarian, and it takes a while for it to start, kick into motion. But after a few weeks, the security at our community would not let anyone out. They were really strict about it. And, and this was the same for communities everywhere, all over Wuhan. So at first, I would say it was more like California. It was more voluntary. But over a couple weeks, it changed completely. And they passed, actually, even an ordinance that everyone had to wear masks. Everyone. By law, if you're outside, in the city of Wuhan, you have to wear a mask. And there were videos going around of people in China getting arrested or, I don't want to say beaten, but, perhaps beaten by police because they weren't wearing masks and they were resisting arrest. But there seems to be some evidence, some of which is anecdotal, that these masks made a big difference. So, I highly encourage people to make their own masks, buy just enough masks for themselves.
Did you run
because
into?
We had a shortage of masks too.
I was just going to ask you that if you had that same issue, with the same issue that we're having here, and mostly because they're trying to get those masks into the hands of healthcare workers. But what did you see there in Wuhan, China, and China in general?
There was a tremendous shortage of masks. I don't know if it's worse in the USA, but it was it was quite bad because everyone was wearing masks. Instead of stocking up on toilet paper, people were stocking up on masks. Us too. We didn't buy a ton, but we bought a couple of boxes, and everyone was doing that. There's also more of a culture of wearing masks, so it was a very easy kind of transition. One of the big hospitals in Wuhan, named Union Hospital, they put out a plea to the public. They said they weren't running low on masks. They were out of masks, out of PPE, protective equipment. They were completely out, and they were asking the community, for supplies. It was really bad, and actually, they were reprimanded by government officials here for doing that because, again, you caused the hospital to lose face. But they were out, and eventually they got the supplies. But for the first few weeks, they were out, and a lot of doctors and nurses died. And it's very nerve-wracking because I feel like the U.S. seems to be following in that direction. At least some places like New York. California is doing better. Fortunately, California is doing better.
As we kind of look to China, perhaps, because it sounds like what we're going through mirrors what happened with you in Wuhan.
Wuhan.
Yeah. So when did you start noticing the trend start to change?
I would say I was watching the numbers every day religiously. Of course, I question the numbers. Given the Chinese government, it's a different system. It's less transparent. It's authoritarian. So you have to take some of the numbers and reports with a grain of salt. That being said, we have nothing else to go off of. So you check the numbers every day. And what I noticed around mid-February, cases were starting to plateau. The number of deaths, the number of new infections around February, about a month after the lockdown, were starting to slow down. And then, gradually as time went on, cases fell even more. And while the government was just as restrictive as ever, and for good reason, I got to say, cases continued to fall, and eventually the situation improved. So I really feel, if I could tell anything to your viewers, it's that if you comply with the lockdown, if you take this very, very seriously, if no one goes out, if we all comply, if we wear masks, if we're all in this together, we take this seriously, I am very confident that we can, at least California and most of the USA can get through this in a couple months. Again, late January broke out, early May, the situation improved dramatically. We're talking 2-3 months. And they took this very seriously. So it might seem impossible now. It might seem terrible. It might seem unfathomable to not work, to just stay home for a few months. But if everyone can do it, if everyone can stick together and stay home, well, not stick together, but be united, then I'm really confident we'll get through this. We saw it here, and we see it in other places too. Like if you look at the numbers in South Korea and Japan, they're already through at least the first wave.
What is the situation there on the ground right now? Are people still worried about contracting COVID-19, or are they still wearing masks? Are they still distancing from each other?
Oh, still wearing masks, of course, and much more so than before the outbreak. I mean, again, more people wear masks in general in China. It's a cultural thing, but a lot of people weren't before the outbreak. And now everyone wears masks. I'm outside, everyone wears masks. That being said, when I go outside, I'm worried. I'm seeing lots of crowds. There's some light traffic in places. Life seems to be coming back to normal very quickly. And, that's a little unnerving because it could easily spread, and it will start spreading before we have any idea. And before we have any idea, it could already be spreading now for all I know. So it's a very risky proposition to go outside. And, our community, they're letting us out. They have I don't know if you're familiar with are you familiar with the green code system? We have codes on our phones. And if you have a green code, which is a QR code, they scan it. If you have a green code, you're free to go. If, however, I have a green code, let's say I go on the metro, they find that there was an infected case on the metro, and using Bluetooth, whatnot technology, they know that I was on that metro. Guess what happens to my green code? Automatically turns to a yellow code, which means I need to go home, shelter in place. If I'm in a red code, I believe that means you're not supposed to leave for 14 days. That means you're locked down. That means a very high chance you're infected. So it's a very clever system. You have to give credit where credit is due, and since it's software, it can update automatically, instantly, and anyone can check it just by scanning it. And every time I leave the community, they check our green codes. They make sure we have a green code, and that could change on a dime if we're unfortunate enough to come into close contact with someone who is infected.
What
It's
else?
a clever system, actually.
What else is the Chinese government doing to prevent the spread or present a second wave, do you think? Can you tell, or are they telling you?
Well, I know some basic things. For example, at one point they opened up the buses and even the metro. Hey, Evan, they opened the metro, right? And then they closed it? Or was that just the buses? You said they opened the buses. The metro is still open? What about the buses? I thought you said they shut them down. Was a rumor? Okay. Well, that's another thing. We're constantly. This is great information. My girlfriend can't speak because of obvious reasons. But I can tell you, they've opened all public transportation here, which makes me nervous, and you won't catch me on any train or bus or anything like that. People are using them. That being said, to their credit, at least they scan your QR code, and they make sure that it's a green code, and that way you can ride. In theory, it might work. I understand. Singapore, for example, they have an app. Germany has developed a similar app. It's clever. That being said, we'll see if it actually works. I can tell you from my own experience, foreigners don't have green codes here. There's not many of us, so maybe it's not a huge deal. But here's the thing. I go to the gate. I don't have a green code. I just kind of have to, I have I have a little form that says I'm okay. But, they want to see a green code. They look at me, we kind of talk a little bit in my limited Chinese, and they just go. And, my concern kind of is, it's great for me on the surface. Of course, I'm thinking, oh, it's great. I can go out. I can, do what I need to do, buy things, whatnot. However, if they do that enough, if it kind of becomes, more laid back, then, fancy green code, all the laws in the world won't matter if enforcement becomes lax. And that's my concern. In a couple of weeks, people will become more relaxed. And even, China can have the best set of laws on the books, but, if they're not enforcing them, then, it doesn't matter much. And that's kind of my impression of living here in China. There are many laws for everything, but a lot of them aren't enforced. And sometimes it even seems kind of arbitrary about how they enforce these laws. So I would say, again, I think the big thing is a lot of laws right now, and a lot of them make sense and support 100%. The question is, will they continue to enforce them? And even now, I see some crowds outside already. Granted, everyone's wearing masks, but I think it's a little unnerving, because I can only imagine how many people will be outside after April 8th. April 8th being the big date that everyone's waiting for, because that's the date that people can leave Wuhan to go to other parts of China. So, I'd pay attention to what happens, around April 8th, because I feel like they're going to loosen a lot of restrictions. And, knock on wood, there's no further outbreaks, but, you have to be prepared.
I want to get your thoughts on what we're going through here now in the United States. Your parents, obviously, I spoke to them a couple of months ago. They live here right in the Bay Area. What are your thoughts as you watch this play out here in the United States?
Well, of course, I'm more afraid for my parents who are in their 70s than I am for myself right now. Even if there's a second wave here, I'm still more concerned about my parents, given the nature of the situation. That being said, I've followed the situation pretty closely, and I've compared the situation in the USA to other countries, and it seems to really vary a lot at a state level. And from what I've seen, it seems like California is doing much better than the rest of the country. And that's not a call for complacency. Quite the opposite. You have to continue to be strong and, stay inside. And I think California will have a much better outcome, a flatter curve. And I definitely think it's in part of, Gray Davis's decision to do the stay at home before, many other states even contemplated that. And I think that made a tremendous difference.
Gavin Newsom?
Washington State, They're flattening the curve. The situation is improving a lot there, and that was the the first major outbreak. So there is hope, and I think you have to look kind of at a state level to see where there's hope. Granted, in some places it just seems out of control. I thank God that California and New York, California and the Bay Area where my parents are, at least that's not one of them.
How are they doing, by the way? How are their parents?
They're doing okay. They're doing okay, and I'm really psychologically I'm looking forward to day 14, because after being inside for 14 days, that if they can keep that up, they're should be okay. That means they haven't been infected. So far they're doing pretty well, and they're lucky they have access to good health care. They're in a nice area, so I'm really happy for them. But not everyone, most people don't have that luxury. So I'm concerned, but I'm glad at least California it seems to be doing pretty well relative to other parts of the country. So
I know you were trying to come. I know you were trying to come back here when this initially all started, but you were running into issues. Do you plan to try and travel back here after perhaps April 8th?
No, at the moment, no idea. I really, I have no idea. At some point, I definitely will return, but it has to be a time when the situation is all calmed down. And now it's not the time, but I definitely will at some point return. The Bay Area will always be my home. Will always be my home, no matter what. So but right here, I gotta stay with my family here. So.
All right. Doug Perez, Bay Area native living in Wuhan, China. He's been through it and shares his experience with all of us, and kind of seeing what's ahead for us in the future, but we do come out well in the end. Doug, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your story with us and with the audience as well.
Thanks so much for having me. Take care.